Good morning, everyone. I actually didn't know that Monica would be here because she usually works on Sundays, but I wanted the song anyway. So, a little bit more choked up than I thought I'd be.
I'm not crying, you're crying.
Well, as Reverend Bonnie said, the theme for this month is converting confusion. And you know, I like to look up the words and see where they came from and all that. And convert, the Latin root is the vert part, means to turn, as in vertigo or revert or reverse, to turn back. And it's interesting that I think we have a pretty good colloquial way of recovering that root. When we say convert something, we turn it into something else. And the root of confuse means in Latin to pour several things together. And again, we have a pretty good ways to say in English what we mean by confuse that recovers that root, and that's to mix things up, to be mixed up. So converting confusion is turning mix up into what? Well, to turn mixed up ideas into more coherent ones, to turn mixed up emotions. Ernest Holmes, when he speaks of confusion, is often speaking of mixed up emotions, to turn them into harmonious ones, to clear things up. When Reverend Kate was here, she said that in order to set a bone, you have to look at where it's broken. And that's not always a comfortable thing to do. You know, we may have gotten mixed up and we're sort of familiar with it and may not want to look at where that is. But an error that won't be looked at or admitted can't be corrected. I don't know how many of you saw the movie American President. I think it's The American President. In that, there's a scene where the president has an exchange with one of his aides named Lewis. And it goes like this. Lewis says, "People want leadership, Mr. President. And in the absence of genuine leadership, they'll listen to anyone who steps up to the microphone." They want leadership. They're so thirsty for it, they'll crawl through the desert toward a mirage. And when they discover there's no water, they'll drink the sand. And the president says back to him, "Lewis, people don't drink the sand because they're thirsty. They drink the sand because they don't know the difference." Confusion, getting mixed up. Now, sometimes they drink the sand not knowing the difference because it's there and they crawl to it. Sometimes someone will hand them some sand and tell them it's water and mix them up. Someone may do that because they're mixed up, they're confused, or they may do it for other reasons. I think even more than leadership, what people are thirsty for is validation. We want our opinions validated. We want our worldview validated. And so we may prefer to drink the sand sometimes, even though it's sand, because it validates what we're thinking, what we believe, rather than look for the water or even go toward the water because it may contradict our worldview or some of our beliefs. But again, an error that won't be looked at can't be corrected, and if you don't see where the bone is broken, you can't set it. So Reverend Kate said, we're taught that everything is in our control. And Reverend Bonnie read, in one of the things she read, said, take responsibility even when something isn't completely in your control. Now, those can be hard things. And we can't always see that either one of those things are the things we should do. We see a lot of things that are not in our control. And I believe that that is one of the reasons that you see so many of these conspiracy theories out there now. They're just, I mean, they're all over YouTube. And again, if you just look for that sand and look for validation, you won't look for the water as well. But I think that the reason is that we'd rather that somebody be in charge, even if they don't have the best motives, than for nobody to be in charge, for things to be in a state of chaos. And so I think that's why a lot of these conspiracy theories are popular. Robert Anton Wilson, some years ago, an author, put together an encyclopedia of conspiracy theories, and he titled it, "Everything is Under Control." And of course, if you think of it as conspiracy theories, that sounds kind of ominous, but the phrase itself is rather comforting. Everything is under control. And so I think that's why we see so many of those. Now, personally, I prefer Ernest Holmes' conspiracy theory. And I'll read a few things from Living the Science of Mind. He says, "We should know that all the power in the universe conspires to help us. We should feel that we live in an eternal presence of pure spirit, whose whole purpose is good, whose whole desire is constructive, and whose whole feeling toward us is one of love and compassion. How wonderful it is to realize that we can so influence our environment that everyone who steps into it will be benefited. If this is what we are doing, the very stars in their courses will conspire to aid us. And now it is high time that we awake from our sleep and come back to a direct and intimate relationship to the power greater than we are. The science of mind conspires with us because it has led us back through the dim and dark caverns of our own thinking to the original source of our being." And finally, from the textbook itself, from the Science of Mind, all nature conspires to produce and manifest the freedom of the individual, that it may unloose its own energy. We may be sure God is for us and must act in accordance with definite law in the universe. But this teaching should not be confused with the idea that we can show people how to get whatever they want. And I know there's a lot of confusion about that these days. A lot of people look at these New Thought teachings and things like the law of attraction and think that it means that you can get whatever you want. You know, as long as you make enough collages, you'll get whatever you want. But that's not the teaching. That's not the teaching. Reverend Kate reminded us that our words have power. I express it this way: words are power tools. Use them with caution and precision. Safety goggles are optional. But sometimes we get confused, we get mixed up because words aren't used with quite enough precision. Sometimes that can happen when words in one language are translated into another. I was on Facebook just a few days ago, and in Facebook, you know, if there's something posted in a language other than English, they always have like a translation available. And someone said that sometimes those translations are good and sometimes they just confuse me. And sometimes the translation can confuse you because what ends up being written there is not really words that go together in English. And so it's just, you don't understand. But sometimes you can become confused and not know it because the translation doesn't really give the meaning of the original. So I had a lot of examples, but we weren't going to be here for, I'm not going to be here for an hour and a half. So I just pared it down. One of them is Psalm 46, and I'm not even going to read it. I'm just going to sort of summarize what the first 9 verses are. First 9 verses are essentially saying that a lot of stuff can happen. A lot of, in our modern terms, in terms of today, all right, there's volcanoes erupting in Hawaii, and there's earthquakes in Oklahoma, and Putin is doing this, and ISIS is doing that, and who knows what's going on in Iran. But don't worry. Don't have fear. The The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is with us. And so it's talking about all these things that are going on that we see as out of our control. But don't worry. And then up until this point, the psalmist has been speaking directly about God. But now God breaks into the psalm for one verse, about half of which most of you know, and that is in the King James, "Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." And the psalmist comes back, "The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge." Now, that translation doesn't really convey the meaning that is going on here. First of all, exalted, it sounds like this highfalutin word. It just means, high. It means lifted up high. That's all it is. And that's all that the original says too. So, God is saying, I'll be high above it all. And be still, there are a few translations that translate as be still, but the word and the teaching I've seen about that is to still your mind, to be meditating. But the word is actually a very physical word in the original, meaning to be strong, to be not strong, to be weak, to be slack. And so a lot of the translations are desist, let go, calm down, stop fighting, let be, stop struggling. And the one I came up with, given the context, is sit back. Sit back. Yeah, all this stuff is going on. Sit back and know that I, God, will be high above everything, taking care of business. Everything is under control. In Ernest Holmes' sense. But we don't get that when we just hear this one half of a verse. And so, in that sense, we get mixed up. We don't know that we are, because this is what people are teaching. They're offering us a bit of sand, not knowing that it's sand. They're mixed up too. So that kind of thing can happen. When Reverend Kate was here, she talked about self-reflection. And as she was talking about it, I remembered yet another thing that is misinterpreted, and that is a verse that probably most of you know. It's from 1 Corinthians. Now we see through a glass, darkly, but then face to face. And that's already just the way we hear it sounds a little, are we looking at somebody like through a dirty window or something? What does it mean? And here, the problem with the translation isn't so much that when they were translating it, there was an error. It's that language changes over time. This was many centuries ago that the King James was written. And back then, and to some extent in poetry now, a glass is a mirror. And in fact, interestingly, in Paul's time, mirrors weren't made of glass. They were made of polished metal, and reflections were not all that clear. They were vague. They were confusing. And so what this verse is saying, well, now we see these confusing reflections of something, but later we'll see them face to face. And as Reverend Kate was talking about self-reflection, I realized you can see just about anything else face to face, but you can't see yourself face to face. You always see your face in a reflection. And what you see depends on what mirror you use. Reverend Kate was making a point, and I'll just read part of it here. She said, regardless of which end of the continuum you stand on, whether you're straight or LGBT, if you're Republican or Democrat, if you're Black, Native American, Asian descent, or white Anglo-European, and she went on to make her point. But I went and looked at that, and I thought, well, just the last three. Native American. Well, I was born in America. That makes me a Native American in some sense, if I look through that mirror. Asian descent. Well, one of my grandparents was born in the Middle East, was from the Middle East, and that's part of Asia. So yeah, if I look through that mirror, Asian descent, I could claim that. white Anglo-European. Well, the other grandparents did come from Europe. Anglo, well, it depends. My language is English. That's the language I speak. If I look through that mirror, yeah. But they all came from Slavic countries. So Anglo depends on the mirror. Even white depends on the mirror. To some people in the alt-right, they don't think I'm white. If I look through that mirror, no, not white. From other people, yes. So what I say yes to or no to depends on the mirror that I'm looking at my reflection through. Now they say you can't step in the same river twice because the river is always changing. I'm saying you can't see the same reflection twice because the mirror that you're looking through is always changing. And when we look at these different reflections, we attach labels to them, as we had Asian descent or white Anglo-European and so on. Now, in this country, most of the time, nowadays, when people are born, they have a bracelet attached to them, which has their name and whatever other relevant information you want to put on there. And sometimes in this country, when people die, they have a toe tag attached to them with their name and whatever information is relevant there. And it is my opinion that those are the only two times in someone's life when they should have a label attached to them. Reverend Bonnie, when she was speaking, said that we often have a lot of false beliefs about ourselves. And I think that those false beliefs are the labels that we attach to ourselves and the labels that we attach to others. Now, when she was speaking mostly about the labels that we attach to ourselves that hold us back. But I think that all the labels we attach to, even the ones we like, even the ones that we didn't just attach but like tattooed on, are false beliefs about ourselves. And the ones we tattooed on others, false beliefs about others. We confuse our identities with those things that we've identified with. We confuse our identities with those labels. And that author, Robert Anton Wilson, that I spoke of before, wrote a lot about that and was summarizing what other teachers have written. And he said, never speak of what something is. Always go back to the activity. Always go back to the verb. In my words, get out of the isness business. Go back to the verb. So instead of saying Ted is an attorney or Joan is a doctor, say Ted practices law. Joan practices medicine. Instead of saying Billy is a thief or Janet is a philanthropist, Billy sold some stuff. And Janet donates a lot of things to charity. Go back to the activity. Forget about the nouns and go back to the verbs. Or again, some of those other labels that Reverend Kate talked about, straight or LGBT. Well, instead of saying Philip is straight or Margaret is lesbian, say Philip likes to have sex with women and Margaret also likes to have sex with women. Go back to the doing and not these labels. Or Democrat or Republican. Instead of saying I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican, say I vote for Democrats. Or I vote for candidates running on the Democratic ticket, so don't even label them. This is, again, back to the verb, back to the activity. Get out of the isness business. Rip off those labels, even if they're tattooed on. Because labels can lead to separation and to duality. Reverend Boddy, quoting Ernest Holmes, said, "The number one false belief behind all things that can get us going down the wrong track is duality," which isn't surprising because somewhere else, Ernest Holmes says that the foundation of religious science is this concept of oneness, of the oneness of an undivided and indivisible whole. And yet, duality is the reason it's the number one false belief behind all these troubles that we may get into is not just that oneness is the foundation, but that it's so easy to fall into that trap of duality. When I read that one of the excerpts from Ernest Holmes before, he talked about a power greater than we are. That's a separation. A few minutes after Reverend Bonnie talked about duality, she read from a book that she's read from a few times, and the author said, "The light comes from elsewhere." And he quoted Desmond Tutu as saying, which is the metaphor that you really liked, "We are only the light bulbs, and our job is just to remain screwed in." It was a nice metaphor, but then later, Reverend Bonnie asks, how to screw in with the truth, with the idea that God and I are one. And I would suggest, start by denying that the light comes from elsewhere. But you see how easy it is. I'm sure that in this message so far, I've probably wandered into duality a few times and probably will toward the end. But to start being alert to it, to be aware of it, is, I think, at least the first step. So as we've all noted, today is Father's Day. And this will be the first Father's Day in which I will not be phoning my dad to wish him a happy Father's Day, because let's face it, nobody knows the area code. But I will talk about him a bit. When I was growing up, whenever I'd wake up in the morning, even when I would be very young and want to occasionally wake up in time to see like Captain Kangaroo, he would already be gone. He'd already be gone going to work. And when I was young, he rarely came home before I went to bed. I don't remember at that early time that he had a pocketbook factory, but when pocketbooks, the business was declining, he opened up another business, a dry cleaning out in Long Island, and he had a long drive back and forth every day and half day on Saturday, except in the summer. In the summer, my mom and my sister and I went up to the Catskills to escape the heat of the city, while my dad, of course, stayed back in the dry cleaning. I don't know if you've ever been in the back of a dry cleaner, but they're hot in the winter. But he stayed there, and he did take Saturdays off during the summer so that every Friday evening he would drive all the way up to the Catskills to be with us on the weekend, and all the way back on Sunday night to go back to that hot dry cleaning on Monday. And my sister and I were always wondering why he was always so tired, why he slept so much when he was with us. He was tired. He did a lot. Before I came down with the chronic fatigue syndrome, I worked late a lot of times. And one time when, I don't know, Monica was maybe 5 or 6, she would ask, "Daddy, why do you always have to go to work?" And I told her, if I don't work, we don't eat. That's the part of this notion of a patriarchy that we forget, that the father has had from time immemorial the awesome responsibility of earning the lives of his family. We call it by, putting bread on the table or earning a living, day by day, earning the ability of the family to live. Thoreau was on the mark when he said the mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation, because it's, as I say, an awesome charge that society has charged fathers with for millennia. I started looking at this book a few days ago, knowing that Father's Day was coming up, entitled, "Do Fathers Matter? What Science is Teaching Us About the Parent We've Overlooked." Because in recent decades, we've overlooked. And in the introduction, the author says this: As I was beginning to work on this book, I ran into a friend at a writers' conference. She asked what I was working on, and when I told her the title of the book, Do Fathers Matter?, she immediately said, well, of course they don't. For a moment, I thought she was joking, but she wasn't. That's part of the race consciousness that has come into our culture for some time now. And science is saying other things. In addition to putting bread on the table, science is showing all kinds of things that fathers do when the child is an infant, when they're growing up. Fathers tend to play with the kids more than the mothers do. I was the one who played peekaboo with Monica. Fathers also are the ones that get the kids to do more exploring, to be out there more. Fathers are very important, and we've missed that. Reverend Bonnie read from, I forget the author, unconscious biases are ways in which we've been conditioned to see ourselves and others through a particular lens or through a particular mirror that often unknowingly favors some and diminishes others. And I think often unknowingly, in the last 4 decades, we've been favoring some and diminishing others that we're unaware of. You know, we remember and for actually quite some time, we remember the series Father Knows Best, and we think that's what the image was. But that was the exception. Most of the series, the family comedies then and later, the father was a boob, and it was the mother who knew how to get things done and knew how to set things right. That's unconscious bias that favors some and diminishes others, and that goes on even more so today. When Reverend Pat was here on Mother's Day, she talked about Gaia, the mother, and the mother archetype. And Gaia was paired with Oranos, Gaia, the earth, Oranos, the sky, the heavens. And they were among the first things, and I found it very interesting when looking at the Greek translation of the book of Genesis, which I imagine everyone does like every week or so. That first line, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, when you look at it in the Greek, it's Oranos and Gaia, the heavens and the earth. And Reverend Pat read some things about the mother archetype, so I thought I'd read some things that I researched about the father archetype. Personification of the masculine principle of consciousness is symbolized by the upper solar region of heaven. The wind, pneuma, nous, ruach, which all means spirit, are thus symbols of spirit as opposed to matter. And the word matter comes from the same root as the word mother. Sun and rain represent the masculine principle as fertilizing forces which impregnate the receptive earth. Here's another one. As the great mother pertains to nature, matter, and earth, the great father archetype pertains to the realm of light and spirit. One more. This function is carried through paternal principle, the logos, which eternally struggles to extricate itself from the primal warmth and primal darkness of the maternal womb. In a word, from unconsciousness. I've noted before, last year, the year before, whenever it was, that it's often difficult to do an Earth Day message in a religious science congregation because Earth Day often is about limitation, about limited resources. And that's because the earth is limited. The heavens are not. In the heavens, there is infinite abundance. The heavens and all its abundance are our birthright. Where thy treasure is it on earth or is it in the heavens? And I would offer a different metaphor from the one that we usually use of the earth as a mother. And rather, I would say the earth is a womb in which the human race has been gestating. And the first birth pangs were about 40 years ago. Just about. In December 40 years ago is when the first men circled the moon. And then 39 years ago, plus a little bit, when they first set foot on it. The heavens are our birthright. If you think about what happens when a fetus stays too long in the womb, when it should have been born, and still hasn't for some reason. After a while, it has grown so that the umbilical cord can no longer supply it all the nutrients and all the oxygen that it needs. Nor can the umbilical cord continue to take away all the waste of the fetus, and so it starts to pollute the amniotic fluid. And I think that metaphor, and that even analogy, is a good one for what's going on with humans and the earth now. Rather than say, well, we've grown too much, we've outgrown the womb. Heaven is our birthright, but to claim it, we have to be born. So the meek will inherit the earth, but the bold will all leave for the stars. The meek shall inherit the earth, and the bold shall inhabit the stars. And so it is.